The Siege of Paris by the Vikings, occurring in 845 AD, is one of the most famous Viking raids on Frankish territory, led by the legendary chieftain Ragnar Lothbrok. This event was part of the larger pattern of Viking incursions into Europe during the 9th century. The siege took place under the reign of Charles the Bald, a grandson of Charlemagne, who ruled over the West Frankish Kingdom, modern-day France. By the mid-9th century, Viking raiders from Scandinavia, primarily from what is now Norway and Denmark, had become increasingly bold in their attacks across Europe. They sought wealth and resources through raids, exploiting the political fragmentation and internal conflicts within the Carolingian Empire, which had weakened after Charlemagne's death. The Frankish Empire, though vast, was divided among Charlemagne's heirs, making it vulnerable to outside threats. Paris, located strategically on the Seine River, was an attractive target for the Vikings. Not only was it a wealthy city with religious and political significance, but its location along the river allowed the Viking longships, known for their agility in rivers, to approach easily. The Vikings were also well aware of the riches of the churches and monasteries in the region. In March 845, a large fleet of about 120 Viking longships, carrying an estimated 5,000 warriors, set sail up the Seine River towards Paris. The force was led by Ragnar Lothbrok, whose raids had already struck fear throughout the Frankish Empire. As the fleet sailed upriver, they plundered villages and settlements along the way. Charles the Bald, aware of the Viking threat, gathered his army to defend his kingdom. He divided his forces to cover both banks of the river, but this proved to be a strategic error. Ragnar attacked the weaker of the two Frankish divisions, decisively defeating them and capturing 111 Frankish soldiers, whom he later hanged on an island in the Seine as a gruesome display of power and intimidation. After defeating the Frankish forces, the Vikings continued unimpeded towards Paris. Once they reached the city, they laid siege, plundering and destroying much of it. The Vikings spared no mercy, ravaging the suburbs and surrounding countryside. At this time, Paris was not the fortified city it would later become, and there was little organized resistance within the walls. Charles the Bald, realizing he could not defeat Ragnar's forces militarily, resorted to diplomacy. To spare Paris from complete destruction, Charles negotiated with Ragnar and agreed to pay a ransom of 7,000 pounds of silver and gold, about 2.5 tons, to the Vikings. This immense sum was raised through heavy taxes on the local population, including the church, which had already suffered from the Viking raids. After receiving the ransom, Ragnar and his forces withdrew, leaving Paris behind in ruins. This payment set a dangerous precedent, as it encouraged further Viking raids in the following decades. While Paris itself recovered, the event highlighted the vulnerability of the Frankish kingdom and the growing power of the Vikings. The 845 Siege of Paris was one of the earliest major Viking attacks on a European capital, and marked the beginning of repeated Viking incursions into the Frankish Empire. The successful ransom also made Charles the Bald and his kingdom a primary target for further raids, as the Vikings realized that they could profit not just through looting, but also through extortion. Over the next few decades, the Franks continued to be plagued by Viking raids, which led to further fortifications and defenses being built around key cities like Paris. By the end of the 9th century, Paris had become a well-fortified city, and during a second, much longer Viking siege in 885 to 886, it was able to successfully defend itself. In a broader context, the Siege of Paris in 845 AD exemplified the shifting power dynamics in Europe during the Viking Age. The Carolingian Empire, once dominant under Charlemagne, was now fractured and struggling to defend its territory from external threats. Meanwhile, the Vikings, through their raids and settlements, were emerging as a significant force that would shape the political and cultural landscape of Europe for centuries to come. This event also contributed to the eventual Viking settlement in Normandy in 911, when Charles the Simple, a descendant of Charles the Bald, granted Viking leader Rollo the territory in exchange for protection against future raids, thus establishing the Duchy of Normandy.